beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings, and as always, welcome back. Thank you all so much for joining me today. There's a great piece in Counterpunch entitled "The Normalization of Genocide." Quote, "Genocide is not a new phenomenon in human experience. It was practiced in biblical times and long before that. Indeed, many historians postulate the theory that Cro-Magnon deliberately exterminated Neanderthals. Yet, as civilization developed and certain humanist values were formulated by philosophers and theologians, the rulers realized that they had to control the narrative if they did not want to succumb to resistance from the rival lords and competing scenarios," end quote. So, we've advanced technologically. The moon that Cro-Magnons gazed at with amazement and wonder, humans have now landed on 6 times, resulting in 12 astronauts walking on the lunar surface. But like Cro-Magnon, exterminating fellow humans is still the order of the day. What is the common denominator of the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and the ongoing genocide in historic Palestine? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Let's quickly look at a couple of today's headlines. First, the Washington Post reports Venezuela orders massive mobilization as U.S. aircraft carrier the Gerald Ford approaches the Caribbean Sea. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez said that Venezuela would put the entire country's military arsenal at the ready, including its militia and almost 200,000 soldiers. This while Russia has declared it stands ready to answer Venezuela's urgent military appeals, according to Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. She said this last Friday during a press briefing. Folks, on this one, you just need to keep asking why. What's the point? Oh, my bad. There is no point. Antiwar.com reports U.S. to build $500 million military base in Israel on the Gaza border. According to the Israeli investigative outlet Shamrim, the base will be big enough to house thousands of U.S. and international troops. The U.S. has already established a military outpost in southern Israel to oversee the ceasefire, or the so-called ceasefire, known as the Civil Military Coordination Center, or the CMCC. But the construction of such a large base would mark a significant escalation of the U.S. military presence in the region. It would also increase the U.S. involvement in Gaza, where Israel is still carrying out attacks and killing Palestinians despite the truce deal. Well, I guess this makes sense. I mean, if you're going to build the Riviera on the Mediterranean, you're going to need a force to protect it. And also, You'll have a built-in clientele with those soldiers needing a place to vacation while they're on leave. Finally, Syria's Shara says Trump didn't bring up his al-Qaeda past during the White House meeting. He told Fox News that Syria is now a, quote, geopolitical ally, end quote, of the U.S. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara said in an interview with Fox News that President Trump didn't bring up his past as an al-Qaeda fighter and commander during their meeting at the White House on Monday. Quote, I think this is a matter of the past now, end quote, Shara said through a translator when asked if Trump raised his al-Qaeda history. Quote, we did not discuss this actively. We talked about the present and the future. We talked about the investment opportunities in the future, so that Syria is no longer looked at as a security threat. It's now looked at as a geopolitical ally and a place where the United States can have great investments, especially extracting gas, end quote. I just wonder, how do you meet with a head chopper and not ask about chopping off people's heads? I guess it's the same way the U.S. determined that Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, also known as Mohammed Bonesaw, has immunity from a lawsuit by murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi's fiance. Let's move on. On today's episode, the issue before us is genocide. How do you normalize genocide? My guest is a law professor at the Geneva School of Diplomacy and served as a UN independent expert on International Order 2012-18. He's the author of 12 books, including Building a Just World Order, Countering Mainstream Narratives, and the Human Rights Industry. He is Professor Alfred de Zayas. As always, welcome back.
Great to see you, Wilmer. Good to be back.
Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Before we get to your phenomenal piece in Counterpunch, I'd like to get your take on a couple of issues. First, as I just talked about, Syrian president or so-called interim president Ahmed al-Shara was welcomed to the White House by President Trump. Before he was al-Shara, he was Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the emissary of Islamic State founder Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. I said yesterday that this is an example of how the U.S. has lost any semblance of moral high ground it had, if it ever had any. Your thoughts, what does this signal to you, Alfred de Zayas?
Well, it's a civilizational tragedy. To watch this, it's almost watching a Greek tragedy unfold. Now, here you have a murderer, here you have a terrorist, and we receive him with all honors in the White House. The level of surrealism, the level of manipulation of the facts of history, it's a total Orwellian dystopia that we're watching here, and the selectivity, the double standards that the United States always uses. By the way, last week, the United States should have been before the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. is the first country. I mean, even North Korea has been before the Human Rights Council and answered questions. The United States is above that. We are legibus solutus. We don't have to account to the Human Rights Council. And of course, this sets a precedent. If the United States doesn't have to appear before the Human Rights Council, well, neither does Russia or China or South Africa. So it's the deliberate destruction of the institutions that civilization has created over the last 80 years. And this is only a symptom with Syria. And to call Syria a And
geopolitical ally.
And it's so absurd. The prior Syrian government under Assad was never a strategic danger for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Neither is Venezuela, neither is Cuba or Nicaragua. But it is a danger to our full spectrum dominance. If we intend to be emperor of the world, we just want to have subjects that say, yes, sir, yes, sir. And I doubt, by the way, very much, that the new Syrian leadership is going to say, yes, sir, to Mr. Trump. But wait and see. Mm-hmm. I find some more, shall we say, optimistic symptoms or developments in the area. You remember that Turkey just issued warrants for the arrest of Mr. Netanyahu and 36 Israeli officers. And that brings me to the idea that this is a good example to encourage states using the international law instrument called universal jurisdiction, mm-hmm. which is accepted by all international lawyers, also in relation to the Genocide Convention of 1948, which is not just a convention for punishment, it's also a convention for prevention. But having said that, there's an element of erga omnes, meaning universal application. There's an obligation on all states parties to reject whatever legal consequences may ensue from the Israeli genocide, from the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory, etc. So what is the solution there? Not only punishing Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, his former Minister mm-hmm. of War, but also boycott, divest, and sanction. And that brings me to another issue. That is, it is possible to argue BDS in the United States. And we have just elected Mr. Mamdani, mayor of the largest city of the United States with the largest Jewish population mm-hmm. of any city in the United States. And he has been elected mayor of the city. He who supports BDS. And I say, bravo. Bravo, New Yorkers, for having used your democratic right to elect a man who actually has values and not just propaganda, not just public relations, not just perception. And when I say about perception, perception shapes politics, shapes diplomacy, shapes peace treaties. And I'm very keen on seeing what the deep state is going to allow Mr. Mamdani to do in New York. I'm sure that they're going to throw many monkey wrenches into his wheels. They will try to dismantle him. We have already seen the very negative articles in the AP, in Reuters, in the New York Post, etc., etc. They paint him as a friend of Hamas. Well, hold on a minute. You know, Hamas is a political movement mm-hmm. that represents the people in Gaza, and they were democratically elected. So give me a break. If you are committed to democracy, you have to be committed to democracy also in Palestine. And Hamas actually is a reaction to the inaction by the Palestinian Authority. Mm-hmm. If the Palestinian Authority had been more forthright and had defended the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, maybe we would not have had the necessity of a more radical movement like Hamas emerging. And of course, you know all the stories about Israeli penetration of the Hamas movement. So there's many murky things to talk about.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
To that point, I think it's important for people to remember, and I want to tie this to al-Jilani, that the development of Hamas was really based upon support from the United States and Israel in response to Arafat and the PLO. They were trying to create a reasonable, I guess might have been the terminology at the time in their minds. They were trying to find a workable or reasonable alternative to what they perceived to be the unreasonable Arafat and the PLO. And I equate that to al-Jilani in the basis of all of that is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And we have seen that come back and bite us in the butt 100 times.
Yeah, no, we wanted to fragment the Palestinians, divide and rule. And we try to play both sides in a way so that we destabilize their unity that could have existed in the Palestinian Authority. And what is, I mentioned already, an optimistic development in the election of Mamdani, but I wanted to mention the importance of this increased number of recognitions of the state of Palestine at the United Nations General Assembly. In September, we saw the recognition by the United Kingdom, by France, by Ireland, by Belgium, by Spain. So there is an overwhelming majority of the world that recognizes Palestine as a state. The United States, of course, has blocked it in the Security Council. Otherwise, there would have been a resolution of the General Assembly welcoming Palestine as a member that just had to be rubber stamped in the Security Council. And of course, the United States has already vetoed it, an abuse of the veto power. And if you know my book, Building a Just World Order, I have a chapter on reform of the United Nations and reform of the veto power so that the veto power cannot be used against the purposes and principles of the organization. Because that is the crux of the matter. You should be able to use the veto power to advance the purposes and principles of the organization. For instance, prohibit the use of force. I mean, this resolution 1973 in the year 2011 that allowed the destruction of Libya, that should have been vetoed. Should have been vetoed by Russia, should have been vetoed by China. They didn't vote for it. They abstained. That was a mistake. And
let me again, before we get to your counterpunch piece, I want to get your take on one more development, and that is the story that the Israeli parliament has backed a death penalty bill targeting Palestinians. It passed 39-16. It still has to clear 2 parliamentary votes to become law. It's backing a mandatory death sentence on Palestinians who killed Jewish Israelis for so-called nationalist reasons, but not on Jewish Israelis who kill Palestinians. And I've been saying to people that this is an example of why Trump's so-called peace plan is a fraud. That people
need. Of course, it's a fraud. Yeah. And our former High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, has called it a fraud. By the way, Navi Pillay, headed the International Independent Commission of Inquiry on Palestine. And on the 16th of September this year, she delivered her report, 72 pages, demonstrating that genocide has taken place and also saying how to fix the problem. But in order to fix the problem, as I said, you also have to fix the perception, because public relations, propaganda for the last 80 years have depicted Israel as a democracy, depicted Israel as a country under the rule of law, as a modern state in the Middle East and a model for others. I mean, if you are brainwashed into perceiving Israel as a positive element in the international order, you are far less capable of analyzing what actually reality is, what's going on there. And I find it important to change that perception, to go back to the origins of Israel in 1945, 46, 47, 48. You must remember, Israel was born out of terrorism. The Zionist movement in Palestine committed countless terrorist acts against the local Palestinian population, committed countless terrorist acts against the Brits. The Brits were still the mandate holder. And they blew up the King David Hotel in 1946, killed about 100 Brits. God knows how many people were also injured and maimed in that attack. Purely terroristic. They murdered the United Nations envoy Volker Bernadotte in 1948. And there's a series, one terrorist act against the other. And they have not abandoned terrorism. Because what else is it when you booby trap pagers and the pagers explode all over indiscriminately, kill any number of civilians? And so these are, it's a mentality of the Israeli government that considers itself just like Trump. They consider themselves above the law, above the UN Charter.
Let me add one more act to that. The very recent act that took place, I think it was in Qatar, when the Palestinian negotiators were meeting in, I think it was Qatar, and
it was in Doha in Qatar,
and a missile lands in their conference room
in the midst of the preparations of peace negotiations. So the bad faith on the part of Israel and on the part of the United States is breathtaking. But then also the bad faith of Reuters and AP and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and CNN and even the BBC that whitewash the crime.
Exactly.
That engage in apology of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide. They banalize it as if this was just normal. And of course, the masses who do not have the time that I have to consult all sorts of sources, including Al Jazeera and Asia Times and Global Times and the African press and the Latin American press. I mean, those who are limited to the English language, or those who are limited to reading, say, New York Times and CNN, of course, they are fully misinformed. And unless they go that extra mile, unless they take the initiative and go and find out what's going on, they will not be able to act appropriately. And as I say, what does it mean to act appropriately? Genocide is the ultimate crime. I mean, it is a frontal attack on civilization. And if we tolerate it, if we become complicit, because many of your listeners don't realize it, but our foundations, our universities invest in the military-industrial complex. They invest in the war industry, in Raytheon, and in Lockheed Martin and Boeing. They invest in those companies that are making billions of dollars in profits by selling weapons to Israel, and then Israel uses these weapons to commit genocide. So we are indirectly complicit in the genocide because we are getting dividends, we are getting benefits by investing in the American war industries and in the war. But then what is left of, shall we say, Christian values in the collective West? Not a lot. I mean, I do not hesitate in stating that the government, not the people, not the people of the United States, not the people of Great Britain and France and England and Germany, the governments are morally bankrupt. The only thing they have is propaganda. The only thing they have is narratives, and narratives that the complicit media keeps repeating. But again, leave the United States, go for once to Africa or Asia, and you will see that the United States is held in contempt. It's not make America great again. I would be happy if you could make America respected again. We are despised. We are feared because we're a bully. I mean, we carry a big stick. And obviously, all countries are considered, you know, what are the consequences of challenging the hegemony of Washington? Well, there are consequences. So you have to be prepared. And that's why the development of the BRICS movement, the development of the New Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These are all optimistic signs of the emergence of the global majority that wants to state we exist and we are not your subjects. We don't have to follow your orders. And that is bringing about de-dollarization. Most of the trade between, say, Russia and China obviously is conducted in yuan or in rubles. And more and more trade is not being conducted in dollars. That's going to have long-term an enormous geopolitical impact. And another thing that is worth mentioning, and China has the possibility to strike back against the United States because it holds trillions in U.S. Treasury bonds. Imagine if they were just to throw them on the market one good day, what kind of a mess that's going to cause in New York and Wall Street. And imagine if China says, forget it, guys, no more rare earths, zero. And it's not just rare earths that you need for your iPhone or for your little convenient electric cars.
It's those tomahawks that they want to send to Ukraine.
I mean, the 90% monopoly that China has on rare earths is
Mhm.
such that it can bring the U.S. empire down if they want to, but they don't want to. That's what people don't understand. China is not threatening the United States. They just want to do business.
Exactly.
Russia is not threatening the United States. They just want to be left alone. Just
And
stop
they have a
provoking.
win-win. They have a stated policy of win-win.
Exactly. And win-win is possible.
And win-win is possible. Let me go to your again, your piece in Counterpunch, the normalization of genocide. And you write, in the digital world, the world of television, memes, and social media, it has become impossible to hide a genocide, thus creating an image problem for governments in democratic societies. Let me ask, how has this genocide become normalized? I mean, because beyond the clear genocide, well, let me just start with that. How has genocide become normalized?
Well, if you let it happen, you have all the information, you see it on television, you see the reports of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine. You see the reports of the Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese. You see the final report of Navi Pillay, the former High Commissioner for Human Rights. You see the 3 advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice, 9th July 2004, 19th July 2024, and now September 2025, which lays it out. You see, genocide is occurring. Israel is at fault. Israel is in rebellion against international law. Israel must withdraw from the occupied territories. And none of that happens. And those countries that could make it happen, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, France, Germany, are all complicit because they have been making billions in profits by selling weapons to Israel, but also weapons to Ukraine, etc., etc. So there's a huge problem of complicity. And as I said, what does normalization mean? Is that, well, we've gotten used to it. We have the knowledge, but we don't act thereon. What can we do? The General Assembly, and I've spoken, by the way, with several important ambassadors. I won't tell you which. And I have encouraged them, I have urged them to bring a Uniting for Peace resolution before the General Assembly. Since the Security Council is blocked, the General Assembly can take action, and it has taken action in the past. The precedent is called Uniting for Peace. They should invoke the responsibility to protect doctrine. General Assembly Resolution 60/1 of 24 October 2005. I mean, if there's any justification for R2P, it is in Palestine. And but we have normalized genocide. I mean, we're seeing it and we're doing nothing. By the way, many countries have local legislation, what is called duty to rescue legislation. If you see someone drowning in the lake, you're not supposed to go around and take pictures and say, oh, how interesting. You're supposed to, try to throw them a lifeline, try to save the person, or at least alert the authorities to this emergency. So the emergency is there, and not only since the 7th of October 2023. The whole narrative in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, blame the victim, blame the Palestinians for rebelling against an illegal blockade, blame the Palestinians for rebelling against the war crimes and crimes against humanity that were being committed against them by the Israelis in the last 30, 40 years. And the best example that I can bring.
So wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Because to that very point, you've just touched on something that in listening to you came to mind, and that is, if we go back to the 1980s and the Reagan administration and the movement to abolish apartheid in South Africa, there was an entirely different global mindset. The South African government was ostracized, and which helped.
That's what should happen. Israel should be totally isolated.
So here's my question, because in the media outlets that you just mentioned, they participated in explaining the narrative about the atrocities against the Black South, the apartheid. But now what you have seemingly is a shift in the media mindset to where many of them, either through their silence or through their misrepresentation of reality, are contributing to the narrative.
In the Western media only.
Correct.
If you read Asia Times,
right,
or if you read Hindu Times, if you read the Indian press, and there's a lot of Indian press in English that I can read, and I do read it.
As do I.
If you read African press, you realize that they are hyper-critical of Israel and why African states or Asian states have not yet brought a resolution to the General Assembly uniting for peace, demanding sanctions on Israel, demanding boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because they're scared of the abuse of power by the United States with its tariff policy, with its sanctions policies, etc., etc. So they're still intimidated. They haven't had the courage. But as I say, we in the West, those of us, I mean, the great majority of the American population, come on. I mean, what is important to you? Your wife, your children, your family, trying to make ends meet. International politics. Right. That is de minimis. International politics for an average family is of marginal interest. And I don't blame them. I don't believe in the collective guilt of the American population because of their silence. And they're not silent. Because even academics, I am very proud to say that I personally know Jeffrey Sachs, who is himself a very proud American Jew, but an American Jew who believes in the positive Jewish values and in the enormous contribution of Jews to the United States and to the world at large. He says, not in my name. You cannot do this in the name of Judaism. You cannot do this in the name of Israel. And you are destroying the image of Israel for decades to come, because the stain of genocide is not easy to wash off, like the stain of the Holocaust has been a trauma for the Germans. And I know several generations of Germans who have suffered. I have students here in Geneva who are Germans. When you bring up the issue, they kind of lower their heads out of shame. Of course, you should recognize the responsibility of Germany for the Holocaust. On the other hand, there is a major distinction, which I explain in my article in Counterpunch. During the Nazi time, you had, not only was it a totalitarian government, a terroristic government. If you criticize the government, you landed in a concentration camp, period. I mean, you were picked up by the Gestapo and you were thrown in Buchenwald or in Bergen-Belsen or in Dachau. And that happened to so many, including Karl von Ossietzky, who died in a concentration camp because he was a critic of the Nazis. But there was total media control. People didn't know what was going on. And I wrote a book about that, by the way. I can send you an English language, shall we say, summary of it. I never published it in English. I published the book in Germany in 2012, and it got great reviews, including, surprisingly enough, in the Holocaust Institute of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. That was directed by the late Professor Israel Charny, whom I knew very well. Israel Charny was from Brooklyn and was a very, very decent human being, and I loved him. I loved his wife, Judy. As the case may be, last time I was with him was in Athens at a conference, and he, again, was a fighter. In any event, his journal, the Journal of the Hebrew University, praised my book to the hilt because it was objective, because it was looking at the issue. We don't want to have collective guilt. We don't want to hold people responsible for what they don't know. But how about now? Our pundits, the American intellectuals, academics in think tanks like the Rand Corporation or the Heritage Foundation, etc., etc. They do know about the genocide in Gaza. They are very well informed, but they do not try to condemn it. They do not try to move you to action. They essentially condone it. So here you have a quantum difference. Whereas the Holocaust happened mostly in Poland and Ukraine. I mean, the Nazis didn't go and kill the Jews in the marketplace of Frankfurt. They just picked them up very nicely. They all could take 2 pieces of luggage. They were loaded into a train. They were transported to Auschwitz, and then in Auschwitz they were gassed. But they were not gassed in Germany or even in places that were public. So we see on television today genocide being almost celebrated by Israel, including by the president of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog. It is so scandalous that something this serious can happen, and that countries that ostensibly support international law and ostensibly support human rights can tolerate this. And that's why something must happen. And what can happen? Break diplomatic relations with Israel. Break all commercial relations with Israel. You buy nothing from them and you sell nothing to them. If you have Israel isolated by 100 states, by 150 states, the government collapses.
Before we get there, you one of the things that you just said was, in talking about your book and why your book was celebrated, was because it's considered to be objective. Objectivity is the enemy of Zionism. I was listening to Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, on Morning Joe last week, right after Mamdani was elected. And objectivity was obviously one thing that Greenblatt was not going to tolerate, and which is why the sites have been trained on Mamdani. He draws the distinction, for example, between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And that's a conversation they do not want to have. In fact, Greenblatt even went as far as to question why Zoran Mamdani would oppose a Jewish state.
Because it is fundamentally racist. I go back to the General Assembly Resolution 3379 of the 10th of November, 1975. This resolution said very clearly, Zionism is a form of racism. And what else is it? It's obvious that if you want to create a state that is only for Jews and will exclude everybody else, if you are creating an apartheid state, it is by definition racist.
The fact you call it a Jewish state, you don't need to say anything else.
And then 16 years later, the General Assembly revisits the issue at a time when Israel is waving the olive branch and is indicating that it's ready to accept a Palestinian state. And it was just before the conference in Madrid in 1991. And then General Assembly lifts this resolution by a new resolution of the 16th of December 1991, Resolution 46/86. Now, I think that was a mistake because, I mean, Israel took us, took the United Nations, took the entire world for a ride. It was fraudulent. And this is 1991. We are 34 years later, and there's still no Palestinian state, and Netanyahu is committed to prevent a Palestinian state. Now, notwithstanding all the recent recognitions of Palestine as a state, that is not going to change the equation. And I endorse it. Jeffrey Sachs endorses it. John Mersheimer endorses it. Ilan Pappé endorses it. Norman Finkelstein endorses it. On the other hand, can it be done with Netanyahu? No. There will not be peace in the Middle East for as long as this war criminal, this genocidal maniac, remains in power. So there must be, and I hope from the inside of Israel, there must be a revolt against this immoral megalomaniac. He must be not only
removed from power, he must be put in prison.
Power, he must be referred to The Hague, appear before the International Criminal Court, be tried, convicted, and must spend the rest of his days behind bars. I must say, I don't like to speak bad of persons who have passed away. Recently, Dick Cheney passed away. A few years ago, Donald Rumsfeld passed away. They both died happily in bed. Now, it is ironic that these people who have millions of human lives in their conscience, who were really hyper aggressive people, who, like in the best Roman tradition of Carthago delenda est, committed horrendous crimes in the Middle East and elsewhere. I mean, they were never tried, and they did not die behind bars.
What about Henry Kissinger?
Netanyahu died behind bars.
What about Henry Kissinger? Would you put him in the same category?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Except that he is not as vicious as Netanyahu or as vicious as Dick Cheney.
Was he wait a minute. Was he not as vicious in his rhetoric, or would you even say that his actions were not as vicious?
Well, he, although he was a very bright man,
Yes.
he was a scholar and he was a realist.
Okay.
I think that he himself fell for some of our own propaganda, as those people who believe, like Francis Fukuyama, that we are God's gift to mankind.
Manifest
and it is
destiny.
our mission to bring democracy all over the world, including to Vietnam and Laos.
American
and Cambodia,
exceptionalism.
by bombing the hell out of them and killing 4 million human beings. I mean, these are horrible things to say, but they must be said. And as I probably said in one of our podcasts in the past, Martin Luther King Jr., in his book, Why We Can't Wait, wrote, page 141, our country, meaning the United States, was born in genocide. And then he goes into the genocide against the Algonquins and the Crees and the Cherokees and the Dakotas and Lakotas and Sioux and Hopi and Navajo, etc. He, of course, devotes the rest of the book to slavery, to segregation, to the horrible crimes committed against the Afro-American community. But it is significant that this great leader, Martin Luther King Jr., would recognize the heritage of hatred that we have in the United States. And this brings me also to the Bible. This brings me to the Old Testament and the message which I described in my article in Counterpunch, that God created all of humanity, but he only selected this little group. He only selected the Jewish people. They were his people, and his people had the right to smite the Hittites and the Canaanites and all others in this territory that supposedly God gave to the Israelis, or rather to the Jews, as their heritage. Well, another Jew, a great Jew whom I very much admire, respect, and quote, the great philosopher Baruch Spinoza in the 17th century, wrote extensively on this myth, on this lie, on this big lie, that God would have chosen only the Jewish people as his people and rejected all the rest of creation. It is totally insane from the philosophical standpoint. You have here an intelligent being called God, and you have a good being called God. I mean, he's not going to say, oh, well, I don't give a damn about the Persians, and I don't give a damn about the Chinese. They can all go to hell. I'm only interested in this little group. I mean, it is a rather primitive story, but that story, the exceptionalism of the Old Testament, sits deep in the minds of the Zionists, sits deep in the minds of the MAGA movement, sits deep in the minds of Mr. Trump, saying, I belong to the select. I belong to the club of the good guys. And by definition, then everybody else is the bad guy. You and your little group are the good guys, and I have the right to do anything I want to do. So that is a concern that I explain in the article.
Very well.
Is the perception
Mm-hmm.
If you see yourself, by definition, as the good guy, you have no understanding for the position of the other guy. There's a principle of Roman law, audiatur et altera pars. You must listen to all sides, for Christ's sake. I mean, I want to know what the narrative of the Palestinians is. I want to know what the narrative of the Egyptians and the Saudi Arabians and the Qataris, etc. And then I will evaluate and I will objectively, to the extent that objectivity is possible, I will try to reach a judgment. I will not regurgitate the crap that I heard last night in CNN. I will have my own opinion. And as I say, I want not just rhetoric in politics, I want action. And I say, I go again and again back to Mandami and back to boycott, divest, sanction. That is the only way forward. If we succeed in identifying Israel as a genocidal state, identifying the Zionist experiment as a fundamentally racist project, fundamentally contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations, then we go back to the General Assembly resolution that welcomes Israel into membership in the United Nations. But that resolution was conditioned on three things, basically. One, that Israel be committed to peace, as the resolution says, that they recognize that Israel is a peace-loving state. Now, I don't know how the General Assembly could say that after they had just killed a UN envoy and after they had expelled nearly 1 million Palestinians from their homes. I mean, that in itself, this was, shall we say, politics. This was geopolitics, and the U.S. hand and the hand of the Europeans pushing for Israeli membership. But there was also an element of recognizing the Palestinians, recognizing their rights, recognizing their right to have a state also, and also recognizing the frontiers of Israel. Israel has been an hyper-aggressive state, always trying to expand its frontiers. And the level of violence, the level of terrorism by the settlers. I mean, again and again, you catch in the press how a poor Palestinian woman was beaten to death by some settlers, or how the settlers machine gun Palestinians, etc., and bulldozed their homes and cut down their olive trees, etc. So, because Israel did not live up to the resolution that accepted its statehood and that welcomed it into the United Nations family, I think the General Assembly has the responsibility to act, has the responsibility to to adopt a resolution under Article 6 of the UN Charter and expel Israel from membership. Of
Final
course,
question for you.
States will block it in the Security Council. But imagine the psychological impact of a General Assembly resolution adopted by 150 states saying, Israel, you are a failed state. In 80 years, you have been incapable of living in peace with your neighbors. You have done nothing but upset the stability of the Middle East, caused one war against another, against the Lebanese and the Jordanians and the Syrians and the Egyptians, etc. Okay, you struck out. So out you know what you could then have? A one-state solution. And the
Democracy.
one-state solution conditioned on the return of all Palestinians
Exactly.
from Jordan, from Lebanon, from Syria,
From the
etc.
United States.
When the Palestinians return to Israel, then you're going to have a Palestinian majority. And if Israel, the Palestinians will live with the Israelis.
Absolutely.
It's the Israelis who don't want to live with the Palestinians.
Absolutely. Well, because when you look at
have a state that will have a Palestinian majority, and that state will be bound by the UN Charter, will be bound by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, etc., etc. And it can be a viable state. But
it was
needs the perception of the intellectuals in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in France, in Germany, who will say this is the way forward.
It was a viable state. You just have to go back to look at the census of the 1920s and the census of the 1930s.
Indeed.
It was a viable state, and the Palestinians outnumbered the Jews, and everybody seemed to get along. The
Palestinians could very well get along with them.
Absolutely.
It's just when you have, that's why I call Israel a purely colonial construct.
It's a settler colonial state.
And it is not even a Semitic state.
No.
Just look at the Israelis. They're Europeans.
They don't even speak the same language.
They're Poles. They are Russians. They are Ukrainians. They are Bulgarians. They are Germans. There are Romanians, etc., etc. And what joins them together is their religion.
To that point, Benjamin Netanyahu's grandfather's last name was Milikowski because they're from Poland. And Golda Meir, I can't remember her last name, but her family was from Ukraine.
No, most of them, I would say, there are a very small minority of Israelis that are Sephardic. These were Israelis that either stayed there or went to Iran, went to Persia, etc., and then they came later. But this is the minority. This is the minority of the real Semitic Jews or Semitic Israelis.
Final question for you. You just talked about expansion, you talked about violence, and you talked about terrorism. Beyond the clear genocide that we see taking place in Gaza, what about Somalia? What about the extrajudicial murders in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean?
Are fully in it. I mean, we bear responsibility for the catastrophe in Somalia and in Sudan.
And in Ukraine.
And now you mentioned Venezuela. It is a very dangerous situation for a number of reasons. The Chinese have a huge investment in Venezuela, and they're not going to write it off. I mean, if the United States were to attack and try to occupy Venezuela, the Chinese would not just simply look. It's not that the Chinese are going to send planes or submarines or something militarily. All they have to do is say, okay, guys, no more rare earths, and all of our dollars, we're throwing them in the market. There it goes. It would cause a collapse of Wall Street. And I mean, that is, shall we say, their nuclear option. And I have no doubt that the Chinese would use it. They're not going to write off their billions and billions of dollars of investment in Venezuela. And the same thing goes for the Russians. The Russians now have a military presence there in Venezuela today. But it's not just the Russian physical presence
Mhm.
in Venezuela, what Americans seem to forget is that they're not loved in Venezuela or in Colombia or in Cuba or elsewhere in Latin America. Only a very thin veneer of elites,
Mhm.
of super rich Venezuelans, super rich Colombians, super rich Ecuadorians
Mhm.
are pro US. The rest are not pro US. And Nicolas Maduro has put together more than 200,000 soldiers. They are ready to fight, and they
Mhm.
will fight.
Because
I
they're
said,
about the Bolivarian revolution.
when I was there in 2017, November, December.
Mhm.
By the way, I broke the ice and I made it possible for the High Commissioner to go to Venezuela. I made it possible for several other rapporteurs to follow on what I prepared the ground
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
But what I did was to go incognito through the streets, since Spanish is my mother tongue after
Mhm.
all. I wore my jeans. I had a guayabera. I didn't have a pretty jacket like this. I obviously did not have a bow tie.
Mhm.
I took my bow tie off. I had my guayabera. I was one of them. And I went around to find out what they think. And the Venezuelans hate the United States. The Venezuelans know that their misery is a direct result
Mhm.
of United States unilateral coercive measures. And I'm using the terminus technicus,
Mhm.
unilateral coercive measures, because I reject the use of the term sanctions.
Okay.
Term is rigged. When you use sanctions, you're implying that the country that is imposing the sanctions has the moral
Right.
or the legal right to do so, which is not at all the case.
Mhm.
The United States has zero right to punish Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua or anybody else. The United States has no right to interfere
Mhm.
in the political system of Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela.
Mhm.
And what the United States is doing is a prohibited use of force in order to get regime change. That's why never use the term sanctions except sanctions imposed by the General Assembly, by the Security Council under Chapter 7
Okay.
of the UN Charter. And never use the term compliance, another rigged term. You
Mhm.
comply with a law
Mhm.
that is just, a law that has legitimacy. I mean, I would never say you should have complied with the apartheid laws of South Africa. You should have complied with the Nuremberg laws of the Nazi system. You should have complied with all illegal laws or contra legem
Mhm.
laws of so many totalitarian countries. And you cannot comply with U.S. Unilateral coercive measures. You should push back. You should fight them off. You should organize all countries who are suffering
Mhm.
from unilateral coercive measures and say, we are not going to play your game. We're going to continue having business with this country, and then we will have business with this country in our own currencies, and we will de-dollarize. That is the way to go. And back to Israel, as I say, that remains priority number one. We have to feed these starving people.
Mhm.
I mean, I am shocked how Israel has dared to defy every decision of the International Court of Justice, every order, and to open up so that all humanitarian aid comes in. And what Israel did against the flotilla, the Sumut flotilla, you remember, you don't see anything in the press about it anymore.
Right.
It's like it never happened. I mean, that was a major war crime, a major violation of international law. But again, our complicit New York Times and complicit Washington Post and complicit CNN, they act like it never happened. And they try to focus on the 7th of October, 2023, as if that was the origin of the problem, when the origin of the problem was in the Balfour Declaration. The origin of the problem was in the colonial, racist, Zionist project that has caused millions of deaths since its inception. And it's still being sold as a viable democratic idea. It is, again, linked with exceptionalism. It is linked with the Old Testament. And if you read Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and you read the book of Joshua and the book of Samuel, you will see how the Lord orders the Jewish people, his chosen people, to exterminate all the others. I mean, that genocide is built in. It is in the DNA of the Zionist movement. It cannot be any other way.
And that's the premise. And that's the premise of your piece.
And that is the premise of my piece, Normalizing Genocide, because now we think, oh, well, it has happened and it continues to happen, and it's not news anymore. It's just old news.
Professor Alfred de Zayas, as always, thank you. The analysis is phenomenal. Thank you for your time, and look forward to having you back.
It'll be an honor to be back.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow, working on the guest, but trust me, it just as with Professor de Zayas, it'll be phenomenal analysis. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below right there in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Why? Because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.